What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the reveal of the number 22 team in my 2023 NFL Power Rankings. As today we're going to take a deep dive into the Atlanta Falcons, a team with expectations to compete and potentially win a weaker NFC South this year. So going to be a fun one. Before we do dive in, if you could do me a huge favor, just take a second to hit that like button down below. It really does help me out. A lot goes into this series to the point that this is all I have time for on this channel this summer, so it's really important to me that these videos do well, and you can do your part there by helping me out. Hit that like button, and then do make sure you consider subscribing as well. If you enjoy the video, we got 21 more of these bad boys to come. You're not going to want to miss them. You can join me on this quest for 100,000 subscribers. I really appreciate it, but without further ado, let's get into it. As always, taking a look at this team's key departures and additions. I did make a slight tweak to this graphic here. It used to say key departures on the left and less concerning departures there on the bottom left. I changed it to impactful departures and insubstantial departures. Impactful saying whether it's, a literal loss or sort of that addition by subtraction, kind of in the Marcus Mariota breath here. It is just saying those are key reps at key positions that will need to be replaced, whereas the insubstantial departures are more, the team is not going to sweat letting those guys out the door. It was kind of a planned loss, if you will. But let's get into it with the Falcons. So they are going to have a shift with the defense at coordinator, and their scheme is going to change pretty significantly here. So they're going to Dean Pease is going to retire. Can't really say hang up the cleats for a coach, but long-term successful defensive coordinator. They're going to bring in Ryan Nielsen from inside the division. Excited about this hiring, excited to get into what this could mean for the Falcons here momentarily when we get into the coach and scheme section of the video. But from a player perspective, man, the Falcons got out their checkbooks this year. They said that whole squishy no defense thing, yeah, we're not going to do that again. We're going to invest in this defense, use our cap space, and they needed to wait a year to do that because their books were pretty messy after the Dan Quinn era. But this was the year they were able to go for it. And honestly, I don't know if there's a whole lot of other teams, if any, that on paper really checks the box at every position as far as they improved there. So as far as their losses go, it really isn't anything concerning. Marcus Mariota is going to head to Philadelphia. Of course, they have plans for Desmond Ridder there. They are going to let Olamide Zaccheaus go. He ate up about 75% of the team's offensive snaps there at wide receiver. Going to have to replace a little bit of juice in that receiver room there. He was kind of the gadget deep threat type there. They do lose Elijah Wilkinson. I would say if there's a question mark on if their replacements can give them what the loss gave them last year, it's probably left guard, but you're really not worried about it. Wilkinson was a street pickup that happened to play pretty well for this team last year. They draft Matthew Bergeron in the second round. They're hoping that will be an upgrade, and I think they're right in thinking that it can be. Abdullah Anderson, I did want to list this as an impactful departure. A rotational third defensive lineman is a key cog, and I thought he actually played pretty well for this Falcons team. I thought they could have retained him. Rashaan Evans is a loss at linebacker. He played almost 100% of this team's snaps last year, veteran linebacker there. But they do bring in Caden Ellis that they feel will be an upgrade, following Ryan Nielsen over from New Orleans. Isaiah Oliver as well. An injury-ridden season last year, but was pretty good in the slot for them. A couple of rotational offensive players listed there in the insubstantial departures. Damiere Byrd, Brian Edwards. They invested a little bit in him. Has upside, but only played 91 snaps for them last year. A couple of rotational tight ends, Michael Pruitt, Anthony Ferkser, and then the veteran corner, Casey Hayward, no longer on the team. But like I said, this team had a much larger list of additions than they did losses. We mentioned Ryan Nielsen already, the new defensive coordinator being brought in here, but Bijan Robinson, their top 10 first-round pick at running back, a couple of wide receivers, Mac Hollins and Scotty Miller, and they go and trade for Jonnu Smith, who Arthur Smith is very familiar with back to their Tennessee days together. I mentioned Matthew Bergeron brought in on the offensive line. David Onyemata, big free agent signing, 3 years, $30 million to step right in as a starting defensive tackle for them, something they were missing last year. And then active on the edge as well, Bud Dupree, Calais Campbell, a couple of big-bodied edge defenders to fit Ryan Nielsen's four-man front here. I mentioned Caden Ellis into the second level at linebacker following Nielsen over. And then big investments into this secondary, much-needed investments. Jeff Okudah, they trade for him from the Detroit Lions, the former number 3 overall pick. Mike Hughes, another former first-round pick. They draft Clark Phillips, a very good fourth-round selection, a ton of value there that they stole and a potential starter in the slot. And then, of course, Jesse Bates, superstar free safety, maybe the best safety in the NFL. They sign him. So massive additions to this team. Some smaller additions as well. Taylor Heineke as insurance at quarterback. They also reel in Penny Hart, a little gadget receiver from Seattle. Interesting one here, Eddie Goldman off the street. He hasn't played for at least 2 years, but was a pretty good nose tackle in his prime. Kind of coming out of retirement here. A sneaky, under-the-radar addition, potentially, for the Falcons, depending what kind of shape he's in. Zach Harrison, third-round pick out of Ohio State on the edge. So just more investments into that defensive line. They pick up Trey Flowers as well, kind of a dime corner, big-bodied guy from Cincinnati. And DeMarco Helms, a seventh-round pick out of Alabama as a safety and a special teamer. So I wanted to add just a little bit of extra context for this series for the kind of off-season moves section of these videos. And I added this positional movement chart kind of showing every position, whether it was neutral, upgraded, downgrade, or if it's kind of up in the air. And I mentioned it with the Falcons. Like, I don't know if there's a team around the league that really checks the boxes across the board where they're expecting that every single position group is either the same or better. And for me, literally every position group on this chart, other than coaching, where it's an unknown because of the change from Dean Pease to Ryan Nielsen, quarterback because we don't know a whole lot about Desmond Ridder, and then kicker punter because it's the same. Every other position on the roster on paper got better this year, and that's obviously going to lead to a lot of expectations and hype for this Falcons team that I think is warranted that they can compete in this NFC South. But this coaching staff is going to be a very critical cog in all of this. So let's break down how these coaches rank up against the rest of the league and what these schemes are going to look like here for the Falcons. And I think, just kind of monitoring the YouTube comments and Twitter over the last year or so, it's become clear to me I'm a little bit of an Arthur Smith apologist. I think more people are down on Arthur Smith than they are high on Arthur Smith, though it is split, right? He's kind of a polarizing figure. Just, he does run an offense that is theoretically more of like a high floor, low ceiling approach, like kind of in the Greg Roman breadth of things where like he wants to run the ball. He's going to base his offense out of 12 personnel, of course, stem that into play action. All of the Shanahan stuff, the wide zone, the play action, all applies to Arthur Smith. And he has complete buy-in to that as an offensive scheme. And if you didn't believe that for some reason, just look at their draft. They quadrupled down on that, bringing in Bijan Robinson and Matthew Bergeron when they potentially had other needs, right? Like, no, they want to do what they want to do, and they want to do it damn well. And I do respect that. And it's not just a philosophy. Like, I really do think Arthur Smith, specifically in the run game, is a guru in terms of drawing up play designs. Like, it's one thing to just mash outside zone repeatedly, and then it's a whole nother thing to understand the numbers, to be able to coach up various different run schemes, and to know when to pull different levers, when to go to counter, when to run a jet sweep, when to go to play action off of the threat of that wide zone, when to mix in pin and pull and trap. Like, Arthur Smith really is kind of a puppet master in the run game. And he also gets into the whole like positionless player stuff, right? Cordarrelle Patterson. He's got Kyle Pitts, a wide receiver playing tight end. I can't wait to see what they do with Bijan. Like, I really do think Arthur Smith is up there in terms of run game coordinating. And even last year, when teams were loading the boxes against him, he was still able to have one of the most effective run games in the NFL. So I do have a lot of respect for Arthur Smith in that category. When it comes to pass game coaching, I don't think he's proved to be necessarily on that level, I suppose. I'm not really worried about it, but I'm not going to give Arthur Smith and Dave Ragone as his offensive coordinator a ton of credit for what they're drawing up when it comes to, like, okay, it's 3rd and 8. We need the right leveling concept to beat cover 4, or like anticipating what kind of coverages you're going to get and how to beat those. They also don't have the best personnel to thrive in the drop back passing game either, but that's in part a decision of this coaching staff as well. So they're not free of blame there. So they rank as tier 2 in run game, which is very close to the top of the league, and tier 4 for pass game coaching, which is still fine, but nothing notably great there. Now, when it comes to what Arthur Smith is as a head coach, a CEO, and overseer of the entire organization, that I think is where people start to raise some questions. I think he has sort of a brashness that can rub people the wrong way sometimes. And I think there, I guess, are fair questions of, like, is he relatable to players and to other coaches on the staff? Is he overly stubborn? I'm not saying those things myself. I still believe Arthur Smith can have a good year here and kind of get, in my opinion, a lot more respect that he deserves, because they haven't had a lot of roster talent in Atlanta. This team really didn't have any business winning 7 games last year. I think the year before that, they overachieved as well. And now that the roster's starting to fill out, I'm excited to see him, I guess, prove a lot of people wrong. But I do think when it comes to, like, being the CEO and having that cohesive chemistry throughout the entire team, that is where he does have to prove himself out. And I think that difference between me being very optimistic about him as an offensive mind and sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of him as a CEO type of head coach is all reflected here in him ranking as the 24th head coach in the league for me, and the Falcons ranking in that tier 4 of fine overall coach and culture, which is kind of that benefit of the doubt slider that we apply to everything in this series. So certainly a big year for Arthur Smith. I'm not going to say he's on the hot seat because they haven't really pulled the trigger on that potential franchise quarterback. If things go way south here, he might be. It is year 3 and they haven't made the playoffs yet, so the clock is starting to speed up for him, but I couldn't really see him being fired this year. If anything, it'd be next year he's on the hot seat. I mentioned Dave Ragone briefly. I don't know a ton about Ragone. He was with Matt Nagy in 2018 through 2020 in Chicago. Obviously not the most prolific passing game, but that is kind of that Kansas City modern pro spread offense. So I would imagine Ragone has his fingers a little bit on the drop back passing game, kind of helping with the game plan a little bit there. This is Arthur Smith's offense, though, make no mistake about it. But then you get to the defensive hiring of Ryan Nielsen, and he's very much unproven. I can't rank him anything higher than tier 4, which is just fine. But I am very optimistic of this hiring, and I was tempted to slide it up a tier because I love Dennis Allen's defensive scheme. I think in a league where everybody wants to play quarters and soft, bend, don't break defense, it's a nice, refreshing change of pace to see a scheme that wants to be physical up front, play big and strong on the defensive line and in the secondary by playing press man coverage, blitzing when appropriate. These 4-3 bump and run schemes are a little bit traditional, but to me, it's the most enjoyable way to watch defense in the modern NFL. And when it's working, it has a much higher upside than your sort of Fangio style schemes, which are so prominent around the league. And we've now seen a couple teams around the NFL trying to replicate the Dennis Allen defense over the last 3 years or so. Detroit, to name one, now here in Atlanta. You're going to notice a lot of crossover roster-wise between Detroit players, New Orleans players who are now Falcons. So it's very clear that that's the scheme they want to run. They come in right away. Ryan Nielsen's like, yeah, I need some bigger bodies on the edge because that's what we got to do. We got to squeeze the defensive line, keep everything inside. Okay, here's Bud Dupree and Calais Campbell. So I'm really excited for the scheme. I really think Ryan Nielsen, who was listed as a part-time head coach, they were kind of doing the roundabout, we've got a bunch of different quote-unquote head coaches in New Orleans as they shuffled up that staff after Sean Payton left. I think Ryan Nielsen has ambition to become a head coach in the NFL, and to me, this really is a high upside defensive coordinator hiring that I wouldn't be stunned if we look back at the end of the year and he's in the conversation for assistant coach of the year and someone that is quickly entering those conversations for head coach consideration. So I'm very high on this hiring. He is unproven. I can't rank him too high. But if I were a Falcons fan, I'd be very excited for both the scheme that we get to run and I believe in the coach, who I think is an ascending guy. And now we're going to get into the roster breakdown here. But first things first, I want to thank the sponsor of the show, Underdog Fantasy. They've sponsored this entire series and will continue to do so throughout the summer. They've been awesome to work with, but they're also just the best place to play fantasy football. This is my first year doing best ball, and I can't get enough of it, man. What's the best part of fantasy football? It's draft day. It's, that looking at your roster after the draft and wow, I did the best job ever. Well, with best ball fantasy, you can do that right now. You can take out your phone, you can draft now, and then you can do as many leagues as you want because it's draft, set it, and forget it. They will pick the best lineup for you based on your drafted team every single week. There's no waivers. There's no trades. It'll put you in a league with 12 other users. You'll compete against them, and then at the end of it all, you'll be, if you do well, you'll be put into the $15 million prize pool. Yes, you heard that right. $15 million in prizes for Best Ball Mania 4 this year. You can sign up right now using promo code TFG. And if you do, they will match up to $100 on your first deposit. That's 4 free entries into Best Ball Mania 4, your chance at $15 million. You'll support my channel in the process. They also have daily pick'ems, which are amazing. They also have daily pick'ems for MLB, of course, the NFL, where you can get up to 20-1 payouts. They have season-long pick'ems for NFL right now, where you can really put your NFL knowledge to the test. Underdog just keeps up in their game, man. I know you guys are going to love playing on Underdog, and you can support my channel in the process, signing up at Underdog Fantasy using promo code TFG. But now it's time to get into the roster portion of the video, and we are, of course, going to start things off taking a look at the quarterback room, where we have to have a conversation about Desmond Ridder heading into year 2. And it's kind of strange because obviously Desmond Ridder is going to be viewed as a massive wild card and a high variance factor for this team. As far as we don't really know what we're going to get from him, how good is he? He's played 4 games. Yet, when I think of the ceiling and floor for this Falcons team and what could go right, what could go wrong, honestly, in my gut, I don't think Desmond Ridder is going to have that big of an impact on what happens with this team. It's really weird to say that, but to me, I watched Desmond Ridder in his 4 games last year, and he was kind of everything that was advertised from him coming out of Cincinnati. He's a guy that is very much that distributor at quarterback, kind of that point guard type, does not have a rocket arm, not someone that is looking to extend a ton of plays in the drop back passing game, wants to get the ball out. He's efficient at reading defenses, can get from 1 to 2 quickly, is good in the quick game. He's got mobility. He's great for this Shanahan style wide zone offense where they get him on the move on play actions. I'm very excited to see what he can do in the designed run game. There was always a very high floor for Desmond Ridder. And while he's only played 4 games, while he was a 3rd round pick, I think he's going to be a starting caliber quarterback. He ranks 30th right now, and I think there's room, obviously, even still to climb those ranks as he shows us more and more of what he can do. But I never saw him as a high ceiling quarterback. I don't think the NFL did either. That's why he fell in the draft. He doesn't have a rocket arm, so the full field isn't always available to him in the passing game. He's also someone that doesn't have great pocket presence. He's not, hanging in the pocket, navigating pressure, keeping his eyes downfield, like always looking to headhunt and find those big plays when the team needs it. Call it factor, call it instincts, call it pocket presence, whatever it is, it's never been there with Desmond Ridder, and it showed last year as well. He would get through his first read, climb to his second read, hopefully, and then he would take off and run. And more often than not, that just has its limiting factors in the drop back passing game. In fact, he reminds me almost to a T of Alex Smith, who for years was kind of the poster child for average quarterback play, high floor, low ceiling. I see so much of that in Desmond Ridder's game. Now, could he surprise in theory? Yeah, of course. Any quarterback can unlock something and surprise at any given moment. Should we expect that? I certainly am not, and I don't think Falcons fans should either. And I think some people might point to like, oh, you knock his arm strength. Well, Joe Burrow is the second best quarterback in the NFL, and his arm strength is comparable to Desmond Ridder. Yeah, but Joe Burrow has that pocket presence. He will headhunt on third down. He's got those instincts, and he's remarkably accurate on the deep ball. Desmond Ridder can throw beautiful touch passes, but he's not as consistent at that as Joe Burrow. So, I mean, yeah, physically speaking, there are similarities, but there's a lot of mental stuff that goes into that too. So, like I said, it's strange. I'm not all that worried about Desmond Ridder. This is kind of what he was when they drafted him. I was even critical of the Falcons when they picked him because I was like, he's probably going to be fine. And then they're going to be stuck with that sort of same dilemma that the Chiefs had for years with Alex Smith, where, yeah, we can win 10, 11 games with Alex Smith, but at some point we need better than that. And the Chiefs fortunately were able to go get Patrick Mahomes. I think at some point the Falcons will be looking to increase their upside, similar to what the Niners did with Jimmy Garoppolo as well, trying to find that in Trey Lance. That's, the Niners have other things going for them, but, you don't always hit Patrick Mahomes when you trade up and try to strike gold, right? So, I don't think he's going to make or break this team's season, even though he's only played 4 games. And depending on how you want to take that, that can be a compliment for a third-round pick. You might see that as a backhanded compliment. If you're a big Desmond Ridder truther and you think he can be a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, you probably see that as an insult. But, that's where I'm at on Desmond Ridder. We'll see what he looks like with more playing time in the NFL. And, of course, my opinion could change on that. But that's kind of what I'm expecting, is him to come into the year, still needs to improve as far as getting through his progressions and always making the right read. Any young quarterback does, as good as he was at that as a prospect. And maybe as the year goes on, he gets more and more comfortable, finishes the year as the 24th best quarterback in the NFL, and maybe heading into next year, he can get into the top 20 or so. But that's about the cap I see on Desmond Ridder personally, and we'll see where it goes. They also bring in Taylor Heineke, who I think is nice insurance in the event that we're wrong in that Desmond Ridder has a high floor and he can't read defenses and things are getting really ugly there. I think he's shown that he can be that guy. But, if things do go surprisingly bad there, Heineke could still keep this ship afloat and be that distributor type and maybe make a little bit more plays happen on third down, and maybe this team can get lucky and still make the playoffs with him in a really bad NFC South. And maybe long-term that's even better for you because you're looking for a quarterback with more upside long-term if that happens. But I like the pickup. They also got Logan Woodside as a third quarterback there. Can move around and do some stuff. I don't hate Logan Woodside as a QB3. But yeah, Falcons ranking 30th. I don't think that's going to tick a lot of people off or be controversial. Desmond Ridder was a third-round pick who's played 4 games. But like I said, I'm not too worried about him. I just don't have crazy expectations for him either. But let's move on to the weaponry here, which is a really unique group and room. You got to keep in mind here, the Falcons are going to run more 12 personnel and more 21 personnel than anybody in the league. That's going to be 12 personnel being 2 tight ends on the field. That second number is the number of tight ends on the field. And then 21 being either I formation with a fullback and a running back, or pony personnel where you have 2 running backs on the field with Bijan Robinson and or Cordarrelle Patterson, Tyler Algier. Like, I think their second running back and their second tight end if you combine Algier and Patterson into their second running back, and then Jonnu Smith will outsnap Scotty Miller, for example. So in this team scheme, I think the fact that their wide receiver 3 being Scotty Miller is much less of a concern than it would be in, say, the Chiefs offense, where they're going to be in 11 personnel 75% of the time. The Falcons were second only to the Ravens last year in 12 personnel, and I think there'd be picket lines in front of M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore if they led the league in 12 personnel again next year. So I'm fully expecting the Falcons to lead the league in 12 personnel this year. But let's get into the players a little bit more. Drake London, I'll apologize, Falcons fans. I was wrong to a degree about my analysis of that pick. I was too harsh on the selection of Drake London. I gave it an F or a D-. I was really hard on them for not taking Garrett Wilson. And to be fair, I was right about Garrett Wilson. Like, I would still rather have Garrett Wilson than Drake London, but it wasn't this catastrophic franchise-altering mistake, because Drake London, in his own right, is an excellent wide receiver. And I don't even think, as the season was going on, I gave London enough credit. And reviewing the film for this team, I was like, man, he's really good. He's such a unique wide receiver. We always want to come up with comps for players. And, with Drake London, there's been Michael Pittman, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and, Mike Evans comes up. Yeah, yes, he is those players. He's some mesh of all those guys. He's his own guy. He's got great size, obviously. He's a little bit over 6'3", like 215, 220 pounds. But he's so smooth, and what really shines about him is that basketball background, and that shows up in two areas of his game. Of course, that ability to win positioning for the catch. He's already a great contested ball winner. He's got massive hand. I don't even know what his hand size is on paper, but the way he plucks the ball out of the air, I imagine it's got to be close to 10-inch hands. But the other area that the basketball stuff shows up is just how quick his footwork is. He can separate in certain route assignments. And I gave him credit for that as a prospect, to be fair. But it really showed immediately at the NFL level to a higher degree than I expected, I think. I mean, he really sets guys up kind of with deception, and the quick foot speed allows him to change direction quickly. So slants, digs, hitch routes, whip routes, whatever you want to do in the short to intermediate game, Drake London is not just going to get open, but even if he doesn't, he can still be a reliable target to box guys out and win those contested catches. So, he really thrived as a rookie, already showed a good rapport with Desmond Ridder. Is he ever going to be like Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, or is he going to be what I think Garrett Wilson could be this year with the Jets as like a top 5 potential receiver? Probably not, because he just isn't a vertical threat. He's not going to line up outside, stack wide receivers. He has legitimate 4.6 speed, but he plays fast because he keeps defensive backs guessing within his route running, and he's able to play into that to create separation. So again, I was so pleasantly surprised by Drake London's rookie film. I think things are only going to get better in that they're going to continue to understand how to utilize his skill set. The chemistry with Desmond Ridder is only going to grow. And I'd be stunned if Drake London didn't have 1,200 yards, 7 touchdowns this year, and finished as a really good fantasy football weapon. If you want to talk about underdog fantasy, I think he's being underdrafted a little bit right now for best ball, or just fantasy in general. So definitely an up arrow for Drake London, and an up arrow for my opinion on Drake London. I'm on board, Falcons fans. Now, beyond Drake London, it's like I said, you got to consider the fact that they're not going to be in 11 personnel all that often, but their wide receiver depth is the worst in the league. I can't explain it. I mean, Tennessee was pretty bad too, but other than Tennessee, it's pretty funny. I mean, Mac Hollins, nice addition. I like what Mac Hollins did for the Raiders last year. He can get down the field. He was awesome on dig routes. He was one of the best guys in the league last year, just running a backside dig 20 yards down the field where, They would read Devontae Adams on one side and then circle back to the other side. And more often than not, Matt Collins was screaming open underneath the free safety if it was single high. So I do think they can use him like that. I think he can peel away from guys on crossing routes when they get into those classic Shanahan style, play action shots. I think he can be a decent wide receiver too. I don't hate the signing. He's not dynamic. He's a straight line athlete, and for his size, you really wish his contested catch consistency was better, and just his hands in general. So often the ball just bounces right off of his hands with kind of a corner in his proximity. So he's not going to be what Drake London is in that area, or even what Kyle Pitts is in that area. And by the way, Kyle Pitts will play wide receiver too for this team a lot. But as really the fourth best piece in this passing game, that's pretty good. Scotty Miller is kind of in a good spot to do what he does. Just, when they want to take a deep shot, just run, go far, go fast, Scotty. Don't drop it. That's really what he's there for. It's all he did in Tampa. It's all I'm expecting here. Just kind of your classic wide receiver 4, deep threat type. You wish you had more of a consistent route runner and hands guy when you really need a bucket in those drop back situations. And maybe Kadarius Hodge can continue to impress. Hodge in Cleveland and last year in Atlanta, shown he can play, man. Very limited looks, but he's been really efficient on those looks. So I'm definitely keeping my eye on him. I think he'll rotate with Scotty Miller, depending on what they want to ask these guys to do. I really think Hodge has shown some good play, and I think they're a little more excited about Kadarius Hodge than a lot of people, and maybe than they should be, but he is fascinating to me. And then beyond that, Frank Darby, I did not like that pick when they made it. I just didn't see an NFL caliber receiver. He has yet to show that he is that. Penny Hart is an interesting little gadget pickup. We know Arthur Smith is going to get creative from time to time with positional flexibility and jet sweeps and screens and all this different stuff. And Penny Hart is that kind of classic gadget guy. He's like 5'8" or something, but really quick, good with the ball in his hands. They also bring in J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. I mean, talk about a positionless player. He's flirted with being a tight end. He's known for being that second-round bust for the Philadelphia Eagles. But if he made this team, I would be fascinated to see what plans they have for using him, and maybe he can play that kind of big-bodied wide receiver role if they want to run play action out of 11 personnel. In theory, Arcega-Whiteside could be that sort of Nick Westbrook-Akine type, but they already have Jonnu and Kyle Pitts to do that, so I don't know if Arcega-Whiteside will make the team. As far as these kind of undrafted types that are hanging around here, the only one I'm really familiar with here is Slade Bolden, who was a slot receiver on those wicked deep Alabama teams. Another guy that if he made the team, I would be interested to see if they want to use him on third downs to try to separate over the middle of the field. But it's a very fun conversation with these tight ends. I mean, Kyle Pitts, talk about just disrespected and underrated. Last year was a nightmare season. And we see this, superstar players just have down years, right? Injuries pop up with skill players like quarterback play can make them very contingent on the success of the quarterback. And that's just what we saw with Kyle Pitts last year. I mean, early on, the fantasy football heads and people waiting for Kyle Pitts to have that huge breakout year 2 where he emerges as like a George Kittle, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce type of level tight end. The initial response was they're not even trying to get him the ball. And that just wasn't true. They were trying, especially in like the first 4 weeks of the season. But let's face it, Marcus Mariota just kept missing him. Like there is a total highlight reel of overthrows towards Kyle Pitts when he was either wide open for a huge chunk or they didn't even give him a chance to like come down with a contested catch, which was, he was one of the most remarkable contested catch receivers coming out of Florida that you'll ever see. So I know the talent is there. I know they can utilize him. He had 1,000 yards in his rookie season. People just forget about that because he only had 1 touchdown, where Matt Ryan is like infamous for being the worst red zone quarterback I've ever seen. Julio Jones had the same problem. It hurt Kyle Pitts in his first year with Matt Ryan. So I still very much believe in Kyle Pitts. The tape doesn't lie. He can separate. He can win tough balls. Huge mismatch problem. They move him all over the field, in line, flexed out as a Y tight end. They'll put him in the slot as a receiver. They'll put him outside as a receiver. They'll do the whole trips left with Kyle Pitts ISO'd on one side of the field. He's going to be better this year. I will be stunned if he's not. And honestly, with them bringing in Jonnu Smith, I wouldn't even be surprised if by the end of the year, they just say, yeah, Kyle Pitts, you're a receiver. We'll give you the position tag and pay you $30 million when the price comes due, and because tight ends get half of that. I wouldn't be even totally surprised if they just go full on with that, because that's really where he's best, is as a receiver, where he's basically like A.J. Brown, kind of, is what he really is. A little bit different skill sets, but, we know what that player can be inside this offense with Arthur Smith, so the arrow is pointing up, and I think it's really pointed in any direction as far as how they're going to use him, but I'm very confident that he's going to be a very nice weapon for this team. And for the people that are surprised that the Falcons ranked above the Saints, for example, in this division, or that they lasted to 22, my optimism for Kyle Pitts is probably a partial part of that. And I like bringing in Jonnu Smith too, because another player wherever they line him up, he's such a good fit for this scheme. And I even said it when the Patriots signed him. I was like, I don't get them paying him that much money, because every piece of high level success that Jonnu has had, it's been in that wide zone Arthur Smith offense, where as a blocker, he's much more useful off the wing or on the move as a reach blocker, as opposed to in power schemes where he has to block a defensive end. That's not what he's going to do. He's just an athlete. He's more of a fullback as a blocker than he is an actual tight end. So for wide zone and counter and trap, that's all stuff he can handle, specifically as a blocker. But those schemes set him up to separate in the receiving game as well because of the threat of play action. He's that kind of archetype, really, as far as the guy with long speed, get him on a crossing route, where, he's blocking down on play action, and then he's sneaking out, pulling away from linebackers who are still trying to figure out if it's a run or a pass, get the ball in his hands, where he still, to me, is one of the best run after the catch tight ends in the league. They're really trying to build this offense around run after catch, and Jonnu's just a really nice piece to have there. Now, for a lot of formations, it's going to be really 3 tight ends with Parker Hess as an inline guy, who does have to hang with defensive ends a lot more. Jonnu Smith as the wing tight end, flexed a little bit wider. And then Kyle Pitts is going to just be their wide receiver too in a lot of these packages. And that's when you can really get into those creative play calls and forcing personnel complications for the opposing defense. And Arthur Smith thrives on this stuff. So he's bringing in just another chess piece there. And I want to fast forward while we're on that point, because Bijan and Cordarrelle Patterson and Tyler Algier are another set of 3 players that in theory could all be on the field at the same time. But let's just clean up the rest of the tight end group so we don't forget about these guys. Parker Hesse is more of a blocker, but he is going to play probably 250 snaps for this team just because he is their best blocking tight end. Felipe Franks, converted quarterback, still kind of in development there, has shown very minor flashes. And then John Fitzpatrick was drafted as a blocker out of Georgia, but the emergence of Parker Hesse has kind of made him moot. But yeah, these running backs, it just is another big piece of this really fun offense to watch, because Bijan gets an A grade from me as a rookie receiver. I can't wait to show you in a minute what he's going to grade out as a running back. I was in the minority that loved this draft pick. For one, just before he was ever a Falcon, I thought he was even underrated as a prospect. Everyone was saying you can't draft a running back in the first round. Hell, I often saw him in the 20s of mock drafts and even falling out of the first round because he's a running back. And I'm just like, no, this dude is different. I put a LaDainian Tomlinson comp on Bijan Robinson. And I don't want to, blow the whole load here, because we have more to talk about him as a runner. But as a receiver, he's special. Texas would put him out there in the slot. He ran a post. I can't remember what team he was against, but he ran a legit like deep post and mossed a safety for a catch down the field. Like, he is just an all-around football diamond. Runs routes, sure hands. We know what he can do after the catch. I think Arthur Smith, who wants to model this offense after San Francisco, saw what they were able to do with Christian McCaffrey, and he's like, I need a little bit of that. Christian McCaffrey was the 8th pick in the draft. Bijan here was also the 8th pick in the draft, right? That's kind of a cool comp there, but they're going to be able to do so many things with him. They might just, like I said, you could legit use all of these backs if you wanted to get really crazy. Like Bijan in the slot, Cordarrelle out wide as a wide receiver because he's a wide receiver converted into running back, and Tyler Algier in the backfield who's super talented as a runner. So the amount of personnel decisions that Arthur Smith is going to be able to play with is going to be extremely fascinating. And I feel like Cordarrelle needs a little bit more time because he has had an emergence here in Atlanta. I don't know how much they'll tap into him in the run game at this point with Bijan coming in, but I still think they're going to get creative. I mean, we know what he is as a kick returner, where he is quite possibly the best kick returner in the history of the NFL. But he, because Devin Hester was a big punt return guy, keep that in mind. But, just when they set him up on screens and crossing routes, like that ability to run in space, like he turns into a kick returner, it shows. And he's a complete handful for corners and safeties to try to tackle. So he is just yet another weapon here who has definitely emerged as like a legitimate offensive weapon after initially being a bit of a first-round bust as a wide receiver, not just a kick returner. But it's a very optimistic outlook. They rank 22nd for weaponry because I still think you have to, at some point, you have to get to 3rd and 8 and beat the defense. And I don't know if they have a whole lot of true separators to do that. But they have, as far as an offense that within this scheme can help them stay ahead of the chains and to the best of their ability, limit how often they have to get into 3rd and 8. This is about as good as it gets outside of San Francisco, probably. It's tough to balance that. And there's just so many teams with great weapons around the league. So 22nd really is not as bad as it sounds. I really think this group is going to help them do what they want to do this year. But now let's talk about that running back room as far as the run game is concerned. And I don't do this a ton in this series, but when I'm so confident about something, I do want to have it reflect in this series. And I rank the Falcons 3rd for running back in the NFL, ranking them ahead of like the Colts with Jonathan Taylor, for example. I really think Bijan Robinson is at worst going to be the 4th best running back in the NFL this year. With this offense around him, with this scheme, fireworks are coming. And you want to talk about underdog fantasy, I've been taking Bijan Robinson with the number 1 pick in my drafts because I am that bullish on him taking the league by storm, being one of these guys that when you think back in the 2023 NFL season, it is various other things and then what Bijan Robinson did running for the Atlanta Falcons. I've said this on Twitter. I think he's more likely to get 2,000 yards than he is 1,000 yards, barring injury, of course. But I can't say enough about what he is as a running back prospect. He's the highest grade I've ever given a football player since I've been doing this, even higher than Saquon Barkley. The big difference there is the vision. The best way to describe it is, Bijan's like, for the video game players out there, a lot of like shooters and stuff have that ability to like go into slow motion mode. And I think Bijan has that as a runner. The way he's able to see second level defenders coming, set up bad angles, and then pair that with his ridiculous juiced up lower half where he has this insane quickness, shiftiness about him. He really does remind me of LaDainian Tomlinson in that way. There's a little Barry Sanders in there. There's a little Christian McCaffrey in there. I see one of the greats when I watch him run the football. I think Atlanta knew that. He was well worth the 8th overall pick, and they're not going to draft him 8th overall and not feed the living daylights out of him. So I'm expecting fireworks here, ranking in the top 3 and easily could finish the year as number 1. But what's crazy is that's not all they have here. They have Tyler Algier, who ran for 1,000 yards in this offense last year. Another great example of why you're so optimistic that Bijan can produce here. No slight to Tyler Algier, but Algier was a 5th-round rookie who's a really good running back, but he's not like physically explosive by any stretch of the imagination. But the fact that he's still here, he's got to be one of the best backups in the NFL. I compared him to Jamal Williams coming out, and I will stand by that, especially after what we saw Jamal do last year, get a big contract in New Orleans. He's got that toughness about him, really good vision, never going to back down from contact, and he brings the hit stick as a runner. Like, he will run through you, great goal line back. I will say, for the fantasy football conversation, that will be one concern with Bijan Robinson, is that Bijan gets you from the 25-yard line to the 3, and then Tyler Algier's getting the touchdown. Like, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Tyler Algier finishes this year with 8 touchdowns on the ground. And I still think they're going to use him a lot, because I think Bijan will be out there with him in pony personnel. Bijan is going to be a willing blocker, as is Tyler Algier. So these guys will be like lead blocking for each other in certain run situations. I still think Algier is going to have like fantasy football value. Like, if you got a bunch of running backs on bye and you need someone that's got a good chance of scoring a touchdown, maybe get you, 10 points with 40 yards and a touchdown. Yeah, Tyler Algier could easily do that any given week. Then you also got Cordero. Again, as long as Robinson and Algier are healthy, I don't know how much Cordero is going to see the ball in the run game. They'll still, mix in a jet sweep or, maybe show, I don't know how often they'll like show empty and put him in the backfield or like anything like that. But there's still creative options to give him a couple touches a game. And he's got, big play ability. But as far as the consistency, like, it's just not always there with him. His vision is very hit or miss. He's not the most like laterally quick guy to change lanes either, but he does work well inside a wide zone blocking scheme. And hell, even Caleb Huntley was incredibly efficient last year. So like, he's never going to see the field, but if he does, you can give him the ball and do just fine. It's the deepest running back room in the league, which is good because they're going to run the shit out of the football this year, and they're always going to have a guy that can, get 15, 20 carries a game if need be. And like I said in that Colts episode, while I have going into the year a higher rating on Jonathan Taylor, though I think Bijan could easily surpass his ranking as an individual running back, the depth that the Falcons have pushes them just slightly over the Colts to rank 3rd in the league. But it's not just that. I'm very fascinated to see how they're going to tap into Desmond Ridder in the run game. They did a lot of stuff with Marcus Mariota last year, and I think Ridder is very similar to Mariota as a runner. He's got 4.5 speed. In a straight line, he can run away from linebackers, and that's a threat. Now, he's not big. He's not going to like break a lot of tackles. He's going to slide before getting hit, which is smart. But, he's not like Justin Fields or Lamar or anything where he's making guys miss and, clearing the second level or anything like that. But definitely a threat. Very curious to see how they tap into him there. The Falcons are going to rank 7th in the NFL from the multiplier that they get in the run game from their quarterback. So needless to say, it's a very exciting group. And then we're going to talk about this offensive line, which is also very fun. However, it is a very split group. And this is why offensive line rankings are interesting, because there are groups in the league that are very one-sided like this, where they rank 4th in run blocking, but 24th in pass blocking. A lot of these guys are really great athletes who can run block that are still, let's just say, coming along in pass protection. But regardless, ranking 4th in run blocking is obviously a huge asset for this team, and I don't think pass blocking is a massive liability, though there are certainly question marks. So from left to right, you have Jake Matthews, who's just a rock. I mean, he's not, even probably a top 10 left tackle at this point. He's borderline. There's a lot of great left tackles, but he's technically sound. He's mostly reliable as far as health is concerned. A balanced athlete as far as, just size, foot speed, arm length, core strength, you name it. And in general, that gives him a very balanced feel as a tackle. He's not the biggest people mover in the run game. He's not locked down in pass protection. He can get overwhelmed by certain matchups. But overall, you feel very safe with him as your left tackle. And then you get to left guard, and that's going to be a big question is what is Matthew Bergeron going to be in his rookie season? I'm actually quite optimistic. Bergeron was a tackle in college, and that's why I didn't have a true first-round grade on Bergeron, but I definitely had it noted where, if you kicked him into guard, especially in, a move blocking scheme like this, he could be a monster. I mean, he has insane athleticism. He's got that dickhead mentality that everybody looks for, and especially the Falcons look for. He's a headhunter on the second level. He'll bury a linebacker. He'll pull and find a corner on the outside and delete him. He's got great athleticism to do that. Loved his run blocking at Syracuse. His problem was he was really disconnected in pass protection as a tackle. But I think that experience as a tackle should help him be okay as a pass protector. And I think he's got upside to be a really complete guard and probably be a complete guard right away. Now, it doesn't always happen right away. I mean, this team, you don't even have to leave the Falcons to see a second round converted tackle into guard not work out. And that was Jalen Mayfield. But I had a third round grade on Jalen Mayfield. I thought he was unathletic, really bad in pass protection. I don't see that problem with Matthew Bergeron. So I think as far as the run game is concerned, he's going to be an immediate asset for them. And then pass protection could be an issue on drop back pass game situations. But there's a chance where that's not an issue. I really think the sky is the limit for Bergeron to the point where, him and Chris Lindstrom could be a lethal combo at guard, on a Cleveland Browns level where you have your Bitonio and Wyatt Teller. This could be seriously at that level if Bergeron hits his ceiling as a guard. So I was a big fan of that pick, and they needed that, right? Left guard was their weak link last year. And they're kind of hoping it's not this year. I think they would be happy if Drew Dahlman was their weak link. They really like Drew Dahlman. I always thought Matt Hennessy should have been the starter, but they just, I don't know if it's blitz protection or just something in the locker room that they just adore Drew Dahlman. Not that Dahlman's a bad player, very similar to Matt Hennessy. And I'm not trying to make this overly pessimistic because he is an excellent run blocker for this scheme. He's that classic Shanahan wide zone scheme center where he's undersized. If you get into drop back passing game, he's going to get overwhelmed. But you're hoping to avoid that by running the ball early. And when you do pass the ball on early downs, it's moving pockets, play action, where Dahlman's going to be much more successful. So if Dahlman is your weak link with this group around him, you're pretty happy with that. But I will reiterate, there were times where teams were able to isolate him as a pass protector, and he just can't really hold up at a practical level there. So you gotta make sure he's getting help with double team, make sure a back's got an eye on it, whatever, because that's the fastest way to the quarterback is through the center, and it's the easiest way to the quarterback, most likely, pending development for Bergeron for this Falcons team. But then right guard, Chris Lindstrom, man, it's hard because Zach Martin's still balling, but I think I would take Chris Lindstrom out of any right guard in the league, especially if you're drafting the position, youth. He has the nod over Zach Martin. Martin, a more secure pass protector. I think Lindstrom at this point, a slightly better run blocker. Both are elite, but man, he was, I think, the most fun offensive lineman to watch last year. It's another one of these players where I was watching the Falcons tape, collected a bunch of highlights, and I'm just talking slowly and filling space so that I have time to show you this cut up of Chris Lindstrom absolutely deleting guys in the run game. He always had that insane athleticism coming out of Boston College, but he has really done a good job of adding play strength and beefing up to the point where he can truly move people off the ball. It's helping him get those pancake impact blocks down the field. And there's a reason that more often than not, they ran to the right side last year because of Chris Lindstrom being that linchpin for the wide zone run game. As a pass protector, he's been developing. He's to the point where he's a very good pass protector. He's not that elite pass protector like he is an elite run blocker, but again, he keeps getting better every year. So he gets a massive contract, and it's completely well-deserved. He's the best player on this Falcons team at this point in time. Make no mistake about it. And then Caleb McGarry was so happy for the Falcons and for Falcons fans that they were able to get him back. Not that he is a lockdown right tackle, and his contract will tell you that, right? 3 years, $34.5 million. That's pretty low-end money for a quote-unquote quality starter tackle. And the reason for that is he's just very adequate as a pass protector, struggles to get leverage at times. His foot speed tends to struggle when he's moving backwards. And it's another one of those situations where, yeah, when you get into 3rd and 8 and you need secure pass protection, he's not the most reliable guy. But the Falcons will take that when he was doing what he was doing in the run game last year. He took a complete leap forward to the point where he's very similar to like what Mike McGlinchey is now, as one of the best wide zone blocking tackles in the entire NFL. His length and grip strength and ability to sustain blocks while on the move in this blocking scheme was really impressive. So they obviously put an emphasis on retaining him. And I love that they got him back. I love that they brought in Bergeron. This was already a really good offensive line last year. And I think it's going to be an even more complete, dominant group this year. It is a thin offensive line. These guys got to stay healthy, especially at tackle. I mean, Ethan Greenidge and Josh Miles are their top 2 backup tackles, and those guys have barely played. So you don't want to have to turn to that. They do have Tyler Vrabel, who I want to say is Mike Vrabel's son. I never got around to his tape, but I like to believe that a Vrabel can block. So we'll see if he makes the team. The interior depth's a little bit better because you have Matt Hennessy, who can play center or guard, and is another guy that's really just been a dominant scheme fit. And I even put the eyes next to him because in an event where Matthew Bergeron isn't what you expected to get in the second round, and that might become evident in camp, I think they have a really good insurance plan in Matt Hennessy, who's certainly a liability in pass protection and all the same things we said about Drew Dahlman, even to a larger degree with Matt Hennessy. I think that probably wasn't even discussed enough for why they like Dahlman more is I think he's just a little bit better at sticking his hands and anchoring in pass protection, though they both do struggle. But I think Hennessy is even more athletic and an even stronger run blocker. So, like, if you have to plug in Hennessy for a year at left guard, honestly, it's not a bad option. He was pretty good there last year when they turned to him. But other than that, you know, Jalen Mayfield, does he take a jump in year 3? You're certainly not expecting it, but would be nice. They did spend a second round. Or did I misspeak? Was he a 3rd round? He might have fallen to the 3rd. I think I might be confusing him in my mind with Carmen Jackson for the Bengals, ironically. So I do apologize about that. But anyway, he just really struggled, especially in pass protection. The clunky feet that he showed at Michigan have been on full display. So anything they get from him is house money. He can be an impact in the run game if things come along in pass protection. But until then, he'd be nothing short of a liability. They spent a 7th-round pick on Javon Gwynn. I saw him as just a guy. He'll probably make the team, but wouldn't want to count on him. Justin Schaefer was a decent run blocker at Georgia. He might make the team as well. Jonathan Harrison hasn't played in like 3 years, but has played a decent chunk of snaps in the NFL, a little bit more of an established veteran there on the inside. But yeah, the offensive line depth is something to be worried about if they do suffer some injuries. As far as the skill blockers go, it's a pretty good unit. You know, I list Kyle Pitts there. Him and Jonnu, neither are great blockers as inline tight ends, and sometimes they won't be able to avoid that. But for the most part, they're going to have Parker Hesse in there as their inline tight end. Well, a lot of the times. I can't say for the most part. But you will still see a lot of Parker Hesse. Drake London's a very good blocker. Mac Hollins, I think a big reason they like him was he's been a dominant run blocker throughout his career. And then they still got Keith Smith hanging around. as a fullback too. So they got that option. So yeah, it's a dominant group of run blockers and kind of a middle of the pack group in terms of pass protection. I know 24th looks low, but if you look at the actual ratings difference between 24 and, let me just pull it up, 24 and 16, for example, it's really tight. I mean, I almost could have put these into tiers. It's 76.7 is the number grade for 16th, and then 75.7 for 24th. So like it's middle of the road in terms of pass protection and pretty much elite in run blocking. So there's your O-line and your offense as a whole. It's a polarizing group. It's going to be, to me, one of the most fun offenses to watch as far as X's and O's and schematics are concerned. To me, it's going to be a very matchup dependent offense. Like if they're able to stay ahead of the chains and like as far as the matchup goes, like they're playing a team with a weak D line or linebackers that can't run sideline to sideline or defensive backs that can't tackle. If you can't stop the early down stuff here, you're going to be in for a long day where they rank second in run game. And their passing game, like via play action and their early passing game stuff's going to be really good. But you have to account for really how bad this team is going to be on 3rd and 9, you know? Desmond Ridder is entirely, unproven in that department. I think their receivers definitely will show up as an issue in those types of drop back setups. I do think they have spots on the offensive line that are issues. Center, left guard, right tackle are all, let's just say, mediocre in pass protection. So the splits are wild with this team. Second in run game in the NFL. I have this as the second best running team in the league and 30th in passing game. But boy, is this going to be fun to watch. And if this team is a playoff team, it's going to be because of the early down stuff being way too much for teams to handle. And this being probably more of like the 12th best offense at their best, I would say. Maybe that's a little optimistic, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball, where it's definitely better than it was last year. Still a long way to go. This roster was horrible last year. A lot of free agent additions, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but let's get into it. So on the defensive line, it's a very new look unit, and I really see 6 starters here. I think on the edge, it's going to be a full rotation between Calais Campbell, Arnold Ebiketie, Bud Dupree, and Lorenzo Carter. I think the 2 most impactful from those will be Campbell and Ebiketie, so that's why I list them first. But let's get through the edge group. So Calais Campbell is 37 years old. He does not have the athletic juice that he once had, though he hasn't slowed down entirely. He still put up, I think like 36 pressures. I don't even know his sack numbers. I don't really spend a whole lot of time looking at sack numbers because they vary so much, but he's still an adequate pass rusher, not an impact there. But he is a really dominant run defender, and that's really what they brought him in to do here. You think about Cam Jordan playing edge for the Saints in Ryan Nielsen's defense. That's Calais Campbell here, right? So he's going to, set the edge and force everything inside and make things easier on the D tackles and the linebackers here. And that's going to have value. It helps elevate this D-line run defense, in fact, where they do rank 14th, above average there. And then I'll just note, Campbell also has had the best years of his career playing for 4-3 defenses in Jacksonville. And I do like him better as a 5 technique than I do as a 3 technique. His weird skill set at 6'8" just seems to be a little bit more efficient against tackles than it is against guards. So I do expect, just like Cam Jordan in New Orleans, Campbell will play significantly more of his snaps off the edge, but he is more of an interior player than Cam Jordan ever has been. So once we get to the interior defensive line, it is worth noting that they do have less depth in that group, and they will have the option to treat Campbell as a rotational starter as an interior player as well. So his flexibility is just invaluable to this team and has been invaluable to whichever team Campbell has been lacing him up for the last 15 years. But beyond him, let's talk about Arnold Ebiketie, who I think will be, as far as like third down snaps, he will get by far more than any of these guys because he is going to be probably their best pass rusher this year off the edge. And he's an interesting study because I loved him as a second-round pick. I thought he could have been a late first-round pick. And through the first 12 weeks of the season, Ebiketie really was up there with what Aiden Hutchinson was doing as a pass rusher. Now, Hutchinson finished a lot stronger, really came on late, and then Kayvon Thibodeaux entered the mix. So I'm not saying he was the best rookie pass rusher, but for the first 12 weeks, he was really having a good rookie season. I'm not trying to put him up there with those other high first-round picks that just have higher upsides, but this idea that he was a second-round steal and is going to be a good rusher for them, I think is very legitimate. Now, he gets hurt in week 12, misses 3 weeks, and then tries to come back, but in the last 4 games of the season, only gets about 20 snaps a game as opposed to the 40 snaps a game he was getting before that, and he didn't have a single pressure in the last 4 games of the season. So very clearly to me, for a guy who his pass rush style is really dependent on cross chops and his hand usage, where he has this kind of rapid hand usage approach as a rusher that's really effective. He's got swipes and rips and chops that he's just really instinctive with. And whatever happened, I think it was a bicep injury. I could be wrong about that, but or tricep or something. Whatever happened with his injury, it completely threw him off as a rusher to the point that they couldn't even really play him by year's end because he was so useless. But you look at a guy that through the first 11 weeks of the season had 26 pressures and 3 sacks. It's pretty good for a rookie rusher, and I think the arrow can certainly be pointing up for him. I've always seen him as a guy that can be a good number 2, not necessarily a number 1, but with where this team's at, they take a good number 2, and they've got some good interior rushers that can help out too. So I expect Ebiketie to be able to be kept fresh because they have so much depth. It's not that he can't defend the run, but I do see him in this scheme as a guy that's going to be coming in on pass rush downs more often than starting out there on first down, because I think this team really likes what Bud Dupree is going to be there. And this rotation is going to benefit both these guys because Bud Dupree has really shown throughout his career, but definitely over the last couple of years, that he just is not an effective pass rusher. I mean, he has, in theory, get off length and power, but he doesn't know how to really put it all together. And now that he's getting up there in age, I think he's lost a little bit of that. So this is a good situation for Bud Dupree, where he can just put his hand in the dirt, stiff a tight end, stiff a tackle, pinch the line, play contain, and play a really good role for this team where he's going to eat up 450, 500 snaps and do exactly what they ask him to do. And then when it comes to rush the passer, they can get him off the field and put in Campbell, Lorenzo Carter, whoever they want to go with. So I do like that signing for what it is. And that role will help him stay healthy too. And then you have Lorenzo Carter, who they did bring back on a decent contract, 2 years, $9 million. So, and the second year is fake money mostly, but that's decent rotational starter money. And he was their best rusher last year. I do think Ebiketie's film is better when he's healthy. And heading into year 2, you expect that growth. But, he's a nice kind of movable edge. He can stand up if they want to go with more. They've always liked to run 4-3 odd packages where that third, it's a 4-3 defense, but it's more of a, 5-2 front, if you will, or a 3-4, where that third linebacker is more of an on-the-ball edge type. They had like Zach Bond trying to do that. They'll do that with all their linebackers in New Orleans. I think they'll do some of that with Lorenzo Carter, where he's decent as a run defender to contain the edge. He's decent as a rusher. As a fourth edge, yeah, sure, sign me up for Lorenzo Carter as a fourth edge. And then they bring in Zach Harrison, who I like this as a destination because I love the scheme fit, bigger bodied edge. He has an amazing mentor because he's in Calais Campbell, because Harrison's 6'5", 280 pounds. His skill set is not unlike Calais Campbell, where a young Calais Campbell had similarly rare athletic traits for such a big guy, but he's never been able to put it all together. Now, it's not like he wasn't getting great coaching at Ohio State, but he did come on in the second half of last season. So I wouldn't be stunned if Zach Harrison turned into a good starter here because the physical tools are there. It's just a matter of kind of getting him on the right track. And as far as scheme and having a mentor, like, this is about as good of a spot as Zach Harrison could have hoped for. So I don't know what they're going to get from him in year one. I wouldn't expect much because you got 4 guys ahead of him that are going to be eating up snaps. But he was a prospect that I was kind of iffy on, and seeing the destination, I really like it. D'Angelo Malone was drafted in the 3rd round last year. I did think that was an overdraft. He has athletic tools, but I didn't think he ever really showed that he can pair that to a good pass rushing skill set. I had him as like a late day 3 guy. I was really surprised when they took him. In fact, I gave that pick a D-. So, maybe I'm just biased because of that, but I think we're more seeing that proving out to be a good take. We see this team investing in pretty much anybody other than D'Angelo Malone, and I don't think he's going to be helped out by the scheme change here. He was always a little bit more of a 3-4 edge for Dean Pease defense, in kind of that like Tyus Bowser mold, with Pease kind of being connected to those old Baltimore defenses. But man, I'm sure he'll make the team because he's a 3rd round pick in year 2. But I think the undrafted pickup, Ikenna Nwachukwu, is a better player in this scheme than D'Angelo Malone. So we'll see. They also still have Adetokunbo Ogundeji, another player that I've just kind of repeatedly said, like, why is he playing so much? Because he's just not good. I will say he's 268-pound edge. They like guys that can set the edge, and that's, if he does anything at a replacement level, it's that. It's throwing his hands out, getting his hands inside on a tackle, and making sure guys don't run to the corner on them. So they'll appreciate that about him. He is not going to get the snaps that he's gotten in the last couple of years, and Falcons fans can say thank God, because I don't think there's a pass rusher in the last 2 years that have been as useless relative to the amount of snaps that they've gotten. I'm not trying to turn this into the roast of Adetokunbo Ogundeji, but on 477 pass rush snaps over the last 2 years, he's played over 1,000 snaps for this team in that time. 17 pressures and 3 sacks. Both years a PFF pass rush grade in the mid-40s. That's brutal. I can't imagine there's anybody that low that has continued to play. So I don't even think he makes the team. I am going to keep an eye on Nwachukwu, not to play this year, maybe not even to play next year. But in 2 years, if Calais Campbell, Bud Dupree, Lorenzo Carter are all gone and Ikenna Nwachukwu is like a good 3rd edge for this team, I won't be surprised. He's a strong guy. He is very much a poor man's Arnold Ebiketie. He wins in similar ways as a pass rusher with a lot of those hand usage, cross chops, and swipes and stuff, and he's physical against the run. I know our guy Brett Coleman really liked him. I watched the film after I saw him hyping him up, and I saw a lot of good stuff. So keep an eye on him down the road. Him and Zach Harrison and Ebiketie, if they can eventually get a number 1 edge in the building here, this can be a really good deep D line now and into the future, at least on the edge. You also kind of got to throw Joe Gaziano's name in there as a hybrid end, but I don't think he even makes the team at this point with all those bodies. But you go to the inside, I love the starters, right? Grady Jarrett is going to be freed up much more. His pass rush production took a dip last year, but who else were opposing offensive lines going to slide to, right? It was such a no-brainer to just slide to Grady Jarrett. Jarrett's a great player, but he's not going to split a ton of double teams. He's not Aaron Donald or Chris Jones as a pass rusher. There's only a select few that can actually beat a double team on a somewhat consistent basis. That's not Jarrett, but one-on-one, I would hate to block Grady Jarrett, dude. He is rapid off the ball. He's incredibly compact and accurate with his hand usage and strong. So, like, he can just take over a block one-on-one. I know he's shown regression the last 2 years, but I'm really happy for the Falcons that they didn't trade him, because without him, I would be almost worried about this defensive line. He's the only one that I see as like a plus pass rusher for them. Onyemata, I guess, is borderline, but they easily could have traded Grady Jarrett's contract away for a third round pick. And I'm just happy that they didn't do that, because now you're trying to compete and you're so happy that he's here. He's also one of the most instinctive run defenders in the league. You don't think of a 6 foot, 300-pound defensive tackle being a disruptive, precise run defender, but that's what he is. He is just, you know, when you have any undersized defensive tackle, it's hard not to just think of Aaron Donald. You know, a lot of the times when Aaron Donald's winning as a run defender, it's because he's just basically, the ball is snapped and all of a sudden he emerges in the backfield in the right place at the right time. Grady Jarrett does a lot of that stuff because he's so quick and smart. So I'm a big fan of Grady Jarrett. Like I said, I know he's regressed the last couple of years, but I think he's going to have a bounce back year. Even though he's 30, I just think everything opening up around him is going to be much better this year with Campbell and Onyemata and hopefully a healthy Ebiketie. But speaking of David Onyemata, really like this signing. They desperately needed a number 2 piece here. Like, I like what Abdullah Anderson did for this team, but he was their next best guy. And there's no doubting David Onyemata is an upgrade there. He's kind of similar to Grady Jarrett, a little bit bigger, but not by much. Just the ways that he wins. He's just a rapid defensive tackle. He gets on you in a hurry, and he just kind of overloads you with a nice combination of quickness, power, hand usage, pad level, and it really makes him a disruptive pass rusher. I think that's where they're going to feel his presence the most. A really down year as a run defender last year, but he's usually been an average run defender, and I think last year was a little bit of an anomaly. Obviously, Ryan Nielsen is very familiar with David Onyemata and how to use him. They've been together basically their entire career, and I love this signing. Really just a plug-and-play, high-end number 2 defensive tackle. Good signing. The interior depth, however, it's not great depending on what Eddie Goldman is, the veteran coming out of retirement there. I do look at Taquan Graham needing to have a big year to step up as this team's first guy off the bench. I like Taquan Graham. I think he plays with great pad level, discipline, and play strength in his arms. He is an undersized guy, was even viewed as a bit of a tweener coming out. Definitely want him playing 3-tech, not nose. That's really why they have Timmy Horn and Eddie Goldman here to 2-gap a little bit more, but I like Taquan Graham. I expect that he can be a decent third, but he's on the lower end of like quality bench pieces, if that makes sense. Would probably be a 4th for a lot of defensive lines. Let's put it that way. Timmy Horn has played for this team, but hasn't played well. They seem to like him, but he could get cut as well. We'll see if he makes the team and if he can improve. Really wasn't much of an impact for this team last year, despite playing 385 snaps for them. It kind of shows you where the state of this defensive line was last year. And that's where they're hoping Eddie Goldman can just be something close to his former self. Now, he had a colossal fall off even in the last years of his playing days, retired in Chicago. But if he's refound the love of the game, I mean, look, I can't blame anybody playing nose tackle to a high level for 4 years, being like, I've kind of had enough. Like, you are getting the shit beat out of you, play in, play out. You got to maintain, you got to basically maintain being overweight as a human. Like, I can't blame anybody for retiring, but if he's refound that love of the game, he's going to shatter my ranking of him right now as a 70 overall player. And he's going to be an impactful third and kind of the ideal run defender up front. So he is a X factor for this defensive line as far as how good it can be. If they just happen to have signed prime Eddie Goldman, this is like a top 10 line in terms of run defense. But that's obviously unlikely, and we'll just have to wait and see. Then you got Elbert Huggins, Carlos Davis, some athletic, late round draft pick types now into year 3 or 4 of their careers. Haven't really shown anything, but we'll see if they make the team, I suppose. So I'm not really worried about this run defense. In fact, I think it's going to be pretty damn good for the D-line, at least. They rank 14th up front. I think they'll do their job there. From a pass rush point of view, it's not a bad pass rush, even though they rank 26th. Pass rush is kind of like weapons, where most teams are investing in this group and making sure they have a good pass rush. Atlanta is just now doing that. And as far as their edge rush is concerned, it's still towards the bottom of the league. So that's obviously going to keep them down a little bit, but it's going to be substantially improved from what they were getting last year. But now let's do this linebacking group, and definitely a more polarizing squad here with Caden Ellis and Troy Anderson set to be the 1-2 punch here. They're going to rank 23rd in linebacker coverage and 28th in linebacker run defense, which is kind of like what we've said with like pass rush and pass protection throughout this video. It's kind of in a big cluster of like, I'm not horribly worried about it, but I don't see this as a huge strength, though there is upside with both these guys. So Caden Ellis was drafted in the 7th round by the Saints in 2019 out of Idaho, and just never really got that opportunity, obviously buried behind a very talented group of linebackers, several different talented groups of linebackers in New Orleans, where Ryan Nielsen has been with Caden Ellis in that entire time. Sensing a theme here with this defense a little bit. But last year, an opportunity opened up when Pete Werner went down, and Ellis thrived, man. He looked like a guy that has taken to coaching and development, a guy that does have athleticism and size to thump. He also emerged as a fantastic blitzer and rusher off the edge where he can help this team there. So he's one of these guys that now he has shown the high-end play. It's just a matter of, okay, you make him the day one starter, put him in there with a decent contract and expectations to be a stud. Does he deliver? And I think there's certainly hopes that he can. We have seen players like this where it was a little bit more of a flash in the pan. He is a little bit of a late bloomer here, year 6 of his NFL career, really showing large amount of flashes for the first time. But he is the complete package. I think it's fair to be optimistic, but it's also fair to be a little bit skeptical on just how good he can be as far as consistently hanging in coverage, being able to man up players and really be an impact in the second level as a linebacker and in run defense. I think you're less concerned based on the high-end play he showed us there. But again, down in, down out, is he making the right reads and finding that balance of aggressiveness and conservatism that is required at this position. I think you're much more skeptical about Troy Anderson. Not that he's bad or can't be great. Well, he was bad last year, but not that he can't be great. This is the nature of the position. How many times have I talked about it? Linebackers, Caden Ellis, maybe another example of that. It just takes maybe 4 years for a lot of players to understand the balance of all those things we just mentioned with Caden Ellis. And for Troy Anderson, he's even behind the 8 ball a little bit more because this is only like his 3rd full year ever playing linebacker. He was being used at running back at Montana State, but he has absurd physical potential. He's got the size. He ran in the 4.4s. He can jump out of the gym. They put him at running back at Montana State for a reason, and he was a productive running back. So, there's nothing he can't do physically. It is all about mental, and just, as I've said with linebackers, it just isn't all going to click right away as far as not biting on play action and being able to get your head around and know where offenses are trying to attack you and to get all your keys right in the run game. To be able to have the confidence to square up and the play strength put together through NFL weight training to consistently bring down NFL running backs. It is an absurdly difficult position to learn, and they seem to be willing to take those learning curves with Troy Anderson, as right now they're listing him as the starter ahead of Michael Walker, and late last season they put him out there trial by fire, and there certainly was a lot of ugly moments being late in the run game, missing tackles, but there were some small flashes as well. So I liked Troy Anderson as a 2nd round pick, but they are putting a lot of pressure on him to start here, and it could really go in any given direction here. There's no question about his upside, that he could be one of the best linebackers in the NFL just off of physical tools alone. But the mental side of things definitely still needs to come for Troy Anderson, and there's a decent chance he's a bit of a liability out there, just as he kind of was last year. So definitely a polarizing group there. They do have some decent depth in the event that Troy Anderson is a complete problem by week 10. Michael Walker has started a lot of games for this team, and he's solid. He's a little bit of a lankier, lighter linebacker. He does struggle to take on blocks, and he's not a phenomenal athlete. There are coverage reps where he does just lose against backs out of the backfield, just as most linebackers do. I think he's just, a little bit more physically limited than guys like Ellis and Troy Anderson maybe. But he has shown flashes as far as ability to read the quarterback's eyes, and he makes a couple plays in coverage every year. So he's not a bad player. I just don't know how much he's going to play because they do seem to want Troy Anderson to work out, and that's just not going to happen if he's not out there playing. The depth beyond that is pretty inconsequential. Nate Landman, Tay Davis have had cups of coffee in the NFL. Andre Smith's a player I like, was suspended for PEDs from Buffalo. Physical, good special teamer. Never has really emerged as a starter type, but he's a good football player to have on your team because he's big and fast and likes to hit. A couple of undrafted types there, Dorian Etheridge and Mike Jones. We'll see if they make the team. It's pretty standard NFL linebacker depth with one decent option in Walker, a special teamer in Andre Smith, and not much after that. So it's a group that has a chance, especially in Troy Anderson's case, to leave you with kind of a weak link on the defense, a player that does vacate his zones against play action and is missing tackles out there. I'm less worried about Caden Ellis for sure. So can't rank them too high coming into the year, but definitely upside with this group to be a fascinating duo. But let's get to the secondary, where I really like this unit. It's incredibly deep. It's one of the deeper secondaries we've looked at so far. I like the starting five as well. They're going to rank 8th in the NFL for defensive back coverage, and I think these guys are pretty good against the run as well, where they're going to rank in that tier 3 of good run defending defensive back groups. But let's start with the corner room. You got AJ Terrell, who to me, I still view as a superstar corner, despite having a down year last year. Sure, there were some losses on film and some coverage busts, but I look at what happened in Atlanta last year. We've already talked about how bad that defensive line was last year, and we all know the impact that a pass rush can have to help out coverage players on the back end, especially those of who are asked to cover number one wide receivers. But also, you think of having Dean Pease as your defensive coordinator, you expect to be a cover one, a zero blitz happy team. The Falcons were actually kind of middle of the road in terms of cover zero. They still did run zero blitzes, but they were towards the bottom half in cover one ran at about 19%. So they were in zone calls about 80% of the time. And I think AJ Terrell, not that he can't run zone. In fact, he still made a ton of plays last year, got his hand on a bunch of balls, had some really good individual games. But I really do think that he's at his best when he can just play physical at the line, get inside a receiver's hip pocket, stay physical throughout the route. And you now look at a cover one scheme coming in. New Orleans, with Ryan Nielsen, they were 5th in the league in cover one last year, and they're not going to be any lower than that this year. I really do think AJ Terrell his arrow might even be pointing up, because you look at what he did in 2021, and even then the surrounding cast, the scheme, regardless of what happened in 2021, he had a dominant season without much around him. So there's no reason AJ Terrell can't be a top 5 corner in any individual NFL season, because he's already shown that. But I think with the improved pass rush, definitely optimistic that AJ Terrell can be just slotted in as a superstar, number 1 corner. Whether he emerges as a top 3 guy or he's just the 8th best corner in the NFL, that's up for Twitter debates and whatever, but I don't think it really matters. You got a number 1 guy there, in my opinion, in AJ Terrell. And then they trade for Jeff Okudah, a 5th-round pick for Okudah. And this is interesting because, Okudah for the first half of last year kind of finally broke out for a corner that was the 3rd overall pick and has really struggled in his time in Detroit. It was fascinating because he didn't necessarily have the physical traits of someone that would normally go 3rd overall at cornerback, but was so technically sound and physical as a man-to-man corner at Ohio State. And it just didn't translate, right? He was getting dotted up in routes and just was a lower floor corner than I think anybody ever expected. for him in Detroit. And finally last year in the first 10 weeks of the season, he was playing pretty well. He wasn't like unbelievable or anything, but he was looking like a quality starter, and the hype was starting to build back up for him. Second half of the year shows up. Detroit made a bunch of changes. They fired their defensive backs coach, started getting a little bit away from all of the man coverage that they were running, and he fell off. And I really don't think that's a coincidence. And it's not that they didn't run man coverage in the second half, but overall it was a good scheme change for their defense, but it did not benefit Jeff Okudah, who I think has shown if he's going to be good, it's going to be as a number 2 corner in a bump and run system. Well, here you go. It's like kind of the perfect slot for him. This is eerily familiar to the New Orleans Saints bringing in Bradley Roby, an Ohio State corner. Roby, I can't remember if Roby was a first-round pick or a second-round pick, but was someone that New Orleans has been able to acquire and retain for pretty cheap as their number 2 corner opposite of Marshawn Lattimore. And I think Okudah could be Bradley Roby, like in a nutshell. I think Roby's a little bit faster, a little bit quicker, so it's not a perfect comparison, but I do like the move. He's definitely the highest upside corner that they have here as a number 2 guy. But, you know, the majority of his career has been pretty rocky, so I'm cautiously optimistic that he can be a good number 2 here, but there's definitely some added risk involved with Okudah as well, and health has been up and down for him as well. But I really like the Mike Hughes addition. He really fits this scheme. We know that because he ran it in Detroit for the first 10 weeks of last season. Physical slot corner, not a special player, but he ran a similar scheme as well with Kansas City the year before that. The Spagnuolo defense is very closely knit with what the Saints do with their defense and what the Falcons will do this year. So, you know, he's going to lag behind occasionally in coverage. He will have his coverage losses. Not the headiest zone corner, but he's not bad in that department. Physical run defender, kind of the ideal just plug-and-play starting slot corner. I think they're going to especially be happy with the floor that he brings to this secondary. And I do picture those to be the starting 3, but they have other options. So Darren Hall is a corner I really liked out of San Diego State. He's lightning quick. He's got good speed. He's highly physical against the run. He was a really smart kind of off-zone quarters defensive back for San Diego State. And he can play a little safety, can play a little outside corner, slot corner. And to me, I do see him continuing to have success as kind of a dime back, where he's just going to be a chess piece for the defense type. There's an off chance that he wins a starting job as a cornerback as well. I don't think it would be week 1 that he does that. It would be in the event that like Okudah struggles and maybe they move Mike Hughes outside and want to play a Hall in the slot or mix things up a little bit. He's a nice depth piece that provides some insurance there. I think if nothing else, Darren Hall is not going to be a complete liability as a defensive back wherever he's playing. So I'm a fan of his, even if he doesn't have the best size or the highest upside or anything like that. Good player. They also bring in Trey Flowers. Sneaky pickup. He is not a starter. He never should be or will be. He's just, a guy that's played some safety and has tried to play outside corner. And just he doesn't have the physical tools in terms of lateral movement skills to hang against good route runners. But you could also list Trey Flowers as the dime back here. And I'm curious to see who ends up kind of getting that 4th DB role, because Flowers for Cincy would come in the last couple, especially last year. I can't remember if he was there for 2 years or just 1, honestly. I think it was just the 1. But they would put him in 8 snaps a game and just go man-to-man on a tight end, and he was really good in a lot of those games. So they have the option to do that with Trey Flowers. You look at the Saints' defensive scheme, P.J. Williams has always been that impactful 6th defensive back, and I think either Trey Flowers or Darren Hall could play that P.J. Williams role really well. It doesn't stop there, though. I mentioned this, a really deep group. They draft Clark Phillips in the 4th round, which was a draft pick that I'm super excited about. They don't need him to start, but I certainly think he showed from his tape at Utah that he can be a plug-and-play starting slot corner. Now, he played a lot more outside at Utah than he did in the slot, but because of his size profile, that's where he's going to be, pigeonholed at the next level. I do think if this was like an off-zone quarters-heavy defense, he could play that, like a Darius Williams type, but in this system, he's definitely a slot. You don't want him playing bump and run on the outside against X-wide receivers at his size. So, I will say I always viewed him as more of a zone corner than a man corner, and for that reason, I do think Mike Hughes is going to be the starting slot. But again, if Okudah struggles, or even if Hughes happens to struggle, you've got some depth and flexibility and a different piece to try. It is a little bit of like that Desmond King thing, where in a zone-heavy scheme, he's a top 10 slot corner in the league. In a man-heavy scheme, like when we saw when he went to Tennessee, he was a borderline liability. So while he was a value in the 4th round, I don't think he's like a plug-and-play stud in this scheme, but he is an interesting player that I would not be surprised if things came along and he was better in man coverage. It's just like he didn't do a lot of that at Utah, right? So we don't know necessarily, but he's not the fastest guy, not the biggest guy. Typically, that can hold you back in man coverage. That's really all I want to say on a negative note from Clark Phillips. I think he's a good player and has a chance to be a starter here someday. But scheme fit really does matter for this position. And then even D. Alford, we are now 7 deep at corner, and D. Alford was an undrafted guy that played honestly really well for this team in a pinch when they needed someone to step up. Clearly, they're not putting a ton of emphasis on him to win a slot job or win an outside corner job. At this point in time, they're probably happy with what they got from him, but they still want him to compete and show them what he's got. But you got to give him his due. I mean, he was a big relief for this team last year. Would be tough to imagine an 8th corner making it there, and that's why only one undrafted guy signed on here, because they looked at the depth chart and they're like, yeah, fuck that. I'm not making that team. So sorry, Natrone Brooks. Hopefully you can at least stick around in the practice squad. And then the safety room is really fun too. Obviously, adding Jesse Bates, who is certainly in the conversation for the best safety in the NFL. I think he is the best true coverage safety in the league. We just talked about this with Kevin Byard, who I think is in that conversation for Tennessee. I think Minka took a step up last year, and I think Derwin James, as far as what he does as a run defender, being elite, puts him in the conversation. But, if coverage is king, Jesse Bates is king, because he's the best coverage safety in the NFL, especially as a free safety, a single high type, and he is this team's Marcus Williams. The New Orleans defense has always valued having that free safety over the top so that they can go to cover 1. So you have a guy that can protect against the deep ball, make sure you're not getting gashed over the top, stay deeper than the deepest, all that, but also have a guy that isn't afraid to gamble and get in the way of throwing lanes, to come down over the middle of the field, take away a dig route, a post. Don't just let him catch it and then tackle. Legitimately have the range to break on those plays and be a disruptor, because when you go single high, especially if you want to run cover 3, which they're going to run cover 3, it's critical to have that guy. So I love what Jesse Bates does in that department, but he's shown much more in the last few years, the ability to come down, play man-to-man on a tight end, come into a hook zone. Since he started doing that a lot more, doing more rotational safety stuff, because he was such a ball hawk, kind of reading the quarterback's eyes and taking away a lot of the intermediate part of the field, being able to play shallower. So they're going to be able to do a lot of different things with him, but first and foremost, he's going to be that center fielding free safety. He's going to have playmaking opportunities. I'm expecting, 3 or 4 picks every year as long as he's here in Atlanta. That can always vary, but that's the type of playmaker he is. And he's really improved his tackling and ability to be a solid run defender and last line of defense too. So I'm the biggest fan. I'm as big of a fan of Jesse Bates as they come. But I also like Richie Grant now in this system as that kind of more strong safety type. His best film to me has been as kind of that slot corner strong safety dude, where he can go man-to-man against any type of weapon that's going to attack the middle of the field. He's an instinctive buzz defender. He's physical against the run. He needs to clean up some of his tackling, and he's just not the biggest guy. He's not a traditional strong safety. Like, he's not Von Bell, but he is Richie Grant. He's his own dude. He can play some free safety, but they're not going to do it a ton because they have Jesse Bates. I never viewed Richie Grant as this super high upside guy just because he is smaller. He's not the fastest guy, but he's a smart defensive back. He's really quick. And I think he's going to be a useful player here. Certainly not someone that's going to hold this group back. Decent depth. Jalen Hawkins has played a lot of games because he's had to for this horrible defense. They're happy to upgrade there with Jesse Bates, but it's good to have someone that has that experience. He's pretty good in cover 2. He's good at reading the quarterback's eyes and can make some plays on balls, but just not the most fluid coverage player, not a consistent run defender. So, I think he's kind of taking his rightful seat as a third safety, decent backup. And then I do like DeMarco Hellams for this fit. Hellams was known for basically keeping Alabama out of the college football playoffs because of the Tennessee game, where it was one of the worst defensive back performances you'll ever see for a college defensive player. And that happened because he is one of the most aggressive defensive backs you'll see. He never saw a pump fake or a slant or a post route that he didn't want to jump all over. And Tennessee saw the film, they ran double moves against him, and there was no one behind him, and it was toast all day. So he is what he is, and I don't think you really want to change that. That's why he's a 7th round pick. He never has to be a starter. But hey, remember that P.J. Williams role we mentioned? P.J. Williams, he was allowed to be a risk taker, a gambler as a 6th defensive back, never playing free safety or manning up the most dangerous receiver on the field. Just put him in a spot where he can run hook zones. He can man up tight ends. He can, jump on opportunities and be a playmaker as a dime back, where if he does gamble and he gambles incorrectly, it doesn't blow up the whole defense like it did when he was playing quarters free safety for the Crimson Tide. So I like him long-term, potentially to play that role. If nothing else, he's going to be a great special teamer because he's fast and he loves to hit. He grew on me the more I watched him, and I really like this fit. So I wouldn't be surprised if someday he's a playmaker for this team. But they have so much depth, I don't know that he's going to play in year 1. So that rounds out the defense. It's a much better group than it was last year, where it was easily one of the worst in the league. But they're still going to rank 26th in the NFL, 24th for pass defense. Really, the secondary doing a lot of the heavy lifting there, being dragged down by just an average front 7, or front 6, really, is what it is these days. Run defense, it looks bad, ranking 26th. It's in a middle cluster of average run defenses. They always say just don't suck against the run and you'll be just fine. And I think the Falcons are very much in that, even if the numbers for them came out in the bottom of that grouping. But I'm not necessarily worried about the run defense. I'm more worried about, is this going to be a scary defense that puts the fear of God in you and makes a ton of plays? I don't think so. I mean, I like AJ Terrell and I like Jesse Bates as playmakers, but it's still going to be tough on them. Like, this is not a good pass rush still. I like some of the improvements they made, and it's going to allow AJ Terrell to have a better year like we talked about. But overall, I see a pretty average defense, with the biggest swing factor honestly being if Ryan Nielsen can be a great defensive coach, which we talked about at the top of the show, is in play. And if that happens, you're probably talking about a league average defense, which is a massive improvement for this Falcons defense from where they were last year. So probably ranking them at their floor at 26th, needing to see the coaching staff prove out that this is the right group for the job. But definitely can't fault anyone for being optimistic there. So let's tie this whole thing up. Again, they ranked 23rd overall in my grand scheme of things, 18th on offense, 26th on defense. Overall, it's a pretty average team that has a good chance to win this division because they're in the horrible NFC South. The special teams, however, is going to rank out as elite. I mean, you have a great kicker in Younghoe Koo. You have the best kick returner in the league in Cordero Patterson. You just picked up Mac Hollins, who's an excellent punt gunner. This is going to be a really special teams this year, which, it's a small slider there, but it does count for something. Special teams are always difficult to predict, but if I would predict anyone to have great special teams, the Atlanta Falcons and one other team that has not been revealed yet do rank as elite. And I do think for a team that is trying to, control the ball, run the ball, protect their defense by not being on the field all game, winning field position, making your kicks, it does matter for a team that's trying to win this way. So it's definitely a feather in their cap. Let's recap their strengths and weaknesses, and then we'll wrap up by taking a look at their schedule and my win total projections for them. But as far as their strengths go, I think they do have strengths on offense, versatile, explosive, offensive weaponry, diverse weaponry. I think the offensive identity and play calling is going to be really fun to watch and a huge handful for opposing defenses. It's going to be a chess match every single week trying to figure out which direction the ball is going and where and who's getting the ball, really, where they're lining up. The run blocking, an obvious strength with that O-line. And then on the defense, the secondary is a strength of this defense. Definitely going to help them be a better group than they were last year. I think they're really deep defensively. D-line, especially at edge. Secondary was incredibly deep. They have Michael Walker as a backup linebacker. They're going to be a relatively injury-proof defense unless things go full Tennessee Titans here or Baltimore Ravens. But for the most part, very good depth. And then special teams, as we mentioned just now. Weaknesses, it really just comes down to the drop back passing game is the defining weakness. That's really going to be the make or break factor for this Falcons team is how efficient can they be when push comes to shove. I think that also does reduce their upside, as we've seen with teams like the Baltimore Ravens, like the Tennessee Titans. Teams built like this, once you get to the playoffs, you have to play against really good, well-coached physical defenses that are much better at forcing you into those 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12 situations. And when they get there, can they execute? And I think that is the biggest question for this Falcons team is going to be overall upside. But as we look at the schedule, I think the floor is very good and their schedule is very easy. So their over-under is 8.5 wins, I think, because that schedule is so easy, which if you look at my formula, that's about where they come out, even though I am a touch higher on this Falcons team. They play their own division, which is booty cheeks. They play the NFC North, which is, it's a solid division, but it's certainly nothing terrifying. It's better than playing the NFC East, that's for sure. And then they play the AFC South, which is by far the worst division in the AFC. And then they have that one opponent in the NFC East being Washington, which is very nice to play them instead of the Eagles or the Cowboys. So to me, the Falcons are right there in contention for this division, which I think 9 or 10 wins is probably going to do it. I think the over-under is right on the nose. I see this as an 8 to 10 win team. If I'm betting anything for this team, it's going to be those division odds where they are second. They're plus 220, and I think that's pretty fair. And I would just say, if you're not a Bryce Young believer, my money would be on the Falcons. The Panthers are the one team we haven't revealed yet in this series. I am a Bryce Young believer, as those that were around for my draft analysis know. But if you don't think Bryce Young is going to step in and be a really good quarterback right away, which I do, I think the money should be on the Falcons to win this division. And they are, even with what I feel about the Panthers, the Falcons are right there, neck and neck with Carolina. Going to be a super fun team to watch. I'm excited to get this deep dive out to you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your comments down below. What do you think? I try to interact with as many comments as possible. You guys have been so awesome with your feedback. What do you think of the ranking? What do you think of the analysis? Just let me know your thoughts. If you haven't yet, please do hit that like button. If you're still hanging around and haven't done that yet, don't know what you're doing, show a little love there. Hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed as well if you haven't done that. Happy 4th of July to the U.S. viewers. TBD on when the next one will be. Might be taking a little vacation here. So just stay tuned, stay posted. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it when it comes out. But yeah, peace out, everybody. Thank you for watching.